This is going to be another fun webinar that we do together.
Hello.
We have lots of people joining us.
That's great. Great news. Always good to have lots of people. Getting going. Yep. Ready to go anyway.
Yep. All right. So for everybody that's joining us, we just had a little bit of technical back and forth. So hopefully you all can hear us. So for those of you that can hear us pretty well, if you don't mind, please go ahead and let us know. Okay. I should be back now. Yep. So for those of you that can hear us, all right, Adam, Michael, Lindsay, Daniel. All right, fantastic. If you guys can drop a thumbs up, that would be great. Would love that. Brittany, thank you. So we're just getting ready. Today is going to be exciting. So, Drew, we briefly talked about the P&L in November or December that we did a webinar. We talked about supplies, the lab cases. Sheila, Katie, thank you so much. So those of you that are joining, just drop a thumbs up that you guys can hear. In just a few minutes, we'll get started. And so the goal was, the idea that you and I had on the last webinar is, let's just do a deep dive into P&L. Basically, like, let's pull up a P&L and let's go through each line item, tell people what this thing, like what each line item means and where they should be relatively to the rest of the industry. Or maybe you can go even deeper. Like, this is all you, Drew. Like, maybe you go deeper.
Sure.
This is where most people are, and this is where I would love for you to be, and things like that. And so obviously I'll chime in a little bit on when it comes to supplies, but everything else is up to you. We do have a couple of pools. So just to make sure that we're actually helping you guys. So like, make sure that you answer those poll questions. And then we probably should get started, right? So let's go ahead.
Yeah, let's go. Let's get going.
Let's go. Fantastic. And again, for those of you that are just joining us, if you can drop a little thumbs up to say that you're here and that you hear us, that would be all we need. And then obviously you can, by the way, guys, you can type questions. So Drew is going to be presenting. So just start typing questions as you go, and then I'll be able to go through and sort out some questions as we take the pause on this. So, all right. We're going all the way back on our slides.
We got to start from the beginning.
Right.
I mean, usually I like to start with dessert, but we'll start from the beginning in this particular instance. So.
Appetizers. Let's go. Thanks, Praveen.
Yeah,
good to see you.
We can start with the appetizers for sure. So, okay. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I know the whole idea here would be to get some better information about P&L structure. You know, what the different areas mean, and how it relates to specifically general dentistry, because of course that's 80% of the market out there, but really dentistry in general. And so the whole goal here is to be able to walk away with, at least at a minimum, having a better understanding of how your profit and loss should be structured. And so, for instance, if you already work with a CPA firm or an accounting firm that is specialized in dentistry, hopefully your books are already set up in such a way that allows you to make good decisions here. And if not, then my goal or my hope for you is that you can walk away with the tools or the concepts to be able to set it up in a way that'll help you define what's healthy for your practice, right, from an overhead perspective. And so we'll talk a little bit about some key ratios and benchmarks. We'll actually go through an example client of our CPA firm's Engage Advisors that I pulled, and of course made it anonymous, so that way we'll protect the identities of the innocent here. But that way we can walk through it, and hopefully you guys can walk away with a better understanding. So, without further ado, let's talk about just real quick who this session is for. And the idea here is that way independent, solo, or multi-group, practices that are independently run, doctor-owned, is really who we're hoping to get the most benefit out of this. Of course, group practices, corporate dentistry is on the rise in the United States, has been for a while. And just a side note, we've seen that slow down tremendously in the last 24-ish months or so. And so we really help and hope to put the things forward to help our independent dentists kind of live the lifestyle with the benefits that you receive from a corporation. However, you still retain the ownership, the autonomy, the profit, right? Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Owning a dental practice is the single best way to have financial freedom, moving forward. And so keeping your overhead in check, which starts with a good P&L structure, is the best way as a practice owner that you're going to be able to maintain financial security in wealth building and get to that work optional lifestyle that we're hoping for our clients. So another group is the office managers. A lot of office managers are tasked with the ability and the authority to make decisions for the office in order to help drive profitability and help keep costs lower and help the owner doctor in themselves, with some kind of structure, be more successful. And then last but not least, we don't want to leave out the associates who are considering ownership, because this is a road ahead of you that you're going to be walking, hopefully walking down that road before too terribly long. For all the reasons we said before, the easiest way to pay off student loans, make more money. Easiest way to get to retirement, make more money. Easiest way to make more money, practice ownership. So that's that all being said, ultimately what you're going to hopefully walk away with is knowing what, how to set up a profit and loss in order to maximize the value of the information that's at your fingertips. All right. And so we're going to talk a lot about, even though I'm a CPA, we're going to talk more about operating performance and structure and process than we are actual tax strategy. Plenty of webinars and CPA discussions out there around tax strategy. So we're not going to touch on that. That's a key portion of how your relationship and interaction should be with your CPA. But we're not going to dive into that today. Another thing to know is that we're going to look at, or that you should really look at is, when you're reviewing your P&L, is look at patterns, right? I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing is patterns and trends within your P&L. That's so much more important than what happened yesterday or last month, very specifically, in an isolated term. And so we'll talk through that, especially when we get to kind of our case study, when we're looking through the entire P&L. And then last but not least, benchmarks are really not a sign of who's winning or who's not. Ultimately, it's more set up as like a range to say, okay, this is healthy, and there's no one size fits all. And so, for instance, you may have higher hygiene salaries than you have front office, or you may have higher, dental supplies, than you have lab fees, or whatever it may be. And that's okay. Ultimately, we just want to see that in the bigger picture, that you're within these healthy ranges. And so that's something to take into consideration as we'll walk through this. Okay, so just, to start at the absolute basics, what is a P&L, a profit and loss? And essentially a profit and loss starts with your revenue and has all of your expenses, it ends with your net income. And so it's a single most useful tool in a business to be able to operate and say, okay, what is the financial impact of X decisions or X period of time in the past? It's not a future looking document, right? It's a reality of what occurred in the past. And so what it doesn't tell you is, it doesn't tell you things like how much cash do I have? How much cash should I spend? That would be a balance sheet, or that would be a cash flow statement. It doesn't tell you how much debt I have for the practice or how much debt I paid off. And it also, typically, it may have some owner lifestyle items, or may have some owner compensation or benefits, but that's not the key areas that you need in order to operate a dental practice profitably and with as much information as you need. So we'll when we walk through our case study, I'll show you how we as a CPA firm break those out, and so that way you can have a true operational profit and income for the practice, and then the owner section down below, so that way you can still capture it, but at the same time you're not using it to make critical decisions. All right, so rules of a dentist specific or a dental specific profit and loss. The first thing that you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at is the percentage of collections. So every expense line item or overhead line item and every grouping of expenses should be taken as a relationship to your dental collections, your dental office collections. That's not production, right? That's collections, some money actually collected. Start with production. You have your write-offs, your adjustments, if you're in network with PPOs, et cetera, and then you end up with collections. In a perfect world, your net production should equal your collections, and that's an operational metric that we look at. But for the purpose of your profit and loss, you want to start with making sure that when you're looking at your profit and loss, you're taking everything as a relationship of your collections, because that's gonna tell you what's working well and what's not working well. The other caveat there is, and I alluded to this earlier, a trend over time is way more valuable and way more important than a single point in time. And when I say that, I say, if I look at yesterday, for instance, you may or may not have some expenses yesterday, right? And you may have a huge expense yesterday that's for a long period of time. And so generally speaking, the longer period of time that you can look at, especially when you can apply a trend line to it, the better off you're going to be. And so 3 months is better than 1, 6 months is better than 3, 18 is better, and so on and so forth. So the ability to look at your P&L and the trends over time, is super important. And last but not least, ultimately, having your profit and loss set up where you can understand the operating income of the dental practice, what it requires to actually operate it without all the other fluff, right? So as a CPA, we want to be aggressive, and we want our clients to be aggressive, to not pay Uncle Sam more than you absolutely have to. But we also want to make sure that we're not making business decisions based on inflated expenses that don't really make sense in terms of the operations of the dental practice. So setting up where you have your true operating expenses and your true operating income, that's super important. So we'll get to our first poll here. And I would love everybody to let us know how often you review your P&L for your dental practice. And we'll take just a couple of quick minutes for everybody to answer that.
I'm about to post it, so share now. So if you guys head out to the polls, all right. Drew, look at it. 73% saying monthly.
Which
that amazing?
Fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. For years and years and years, we heard from lots and lots and lots of dentists that they receive their P&L from their CPA and they toss it into a drawer when they receive it. No. So that's and lots and lots of clients over time. Yeah, clients that we hadn't worked with before have said that, just because a lot of times I feel like it's not set up in a way that's useful. And so 65% of the audience has responded. So I think we'll probably go ahead and close it and move on. But just so you guys know, 73% of respondents said monthly, 9% said quarterly, and 18%, said maybe once or twice a year. So nobody said
no one says never, not sure.
And nobody said never.
Great job, guys. Great job. The 20 of you that are attending, it's so cool.
Definitely a win there for sure. So people you all are definitely interested in running a successful business. So that's a good thing to hear. So moving on. So we
Drew,
talked
very
a lot
quick,
about.
I'll interrupt you. I'll interrupt you just for 1 second. So the questions are coming in, but we're keeping them till the end so that Drew can go through all of the materials. We want to make sure because it's a packed material, guys. So we will get through all of it. If there's not enough time, we will include those questions into the Q&A that Drew could do offline, and we'll include it in the materials that we send out after. But we'll try to get to them during the session at the very end. So let's just keep going.
Okay. Thanks so much for that clarification, Tiger. Okay, so we talked a lot about like P&L structure, and I've hounded on. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here about net operation expenses and operating income for the dental practice, and that comes down to like the whole ability to benchmark. So, like for instance, we as a CPA firm are working on a system for our clients that every single month we'll be able to benchmark the trailing 12 months of our client base against each other. And so it's super important to be able to have a structured profit and loss, with consistent information and consistent grouping. Because so for instance, if you guys are throwing, office supplies in with dental supplies and just calling it supplies, like your information is not going to be able to be compared directly to your peer group with any kind of meaningful information. So that's why it's very important to be able to have that proper structure, because we don't want to make decisions based on misleading benchmarks, right? That's number one. Another issue that could come up would be skewed performance, right? And so you may look at your numbers and you may think like, man, I'm not spending enough on X, Y, or Z, or man, I'm spending way too much on X, Y, or Z, simply just as a result of bad information. It's kind of like a lab case, right? And so you can't expect your lab to send a crown back to you that fits perfectly if you send it to them without a great impression or without great imaging, without a great scan. So it's kind of bad information out, bad information in, so on and so forth. And lastly, that of course that'll give you maybe a false sense of security that things are going better than they are. Or on the flip side, maybe it might cause some heartburn, where heartburn isn't necessarily due. And so the last thing that we want is people freaking out about things that they shouldn't be freaking out about. One thing to note in dentistry or in accounting as a whole, depending on which type of CPA you work with, your practice size, so on and so forth, and we won't spend a ton of time on this, but there's two different theories. One is called cash basis. One is called accrual basis. And effectively, the whole purpose there, dental practices almost exclusively are going to be on a cash basis, meaning like, what is the actual cash that comes into my account? What is the actual cash that leaves my account? Accrual basis would mean like, hey, I do all these procedures for patients, my production, I bill them, so therefore I have accounts receivable. Accrual basis would be recognizing that income when I bill them and I have those receivables. And that's what you don't want. You don't want to owe money to the government on dollars you haven't collected yet that are in your accounts receivable. And you also, don't want to make decisions based on revenue that you haven't actually received. It'll falsely inflate your profit. So ultimately, we'll focus on cash basis, and I would encourage you guys also to focus on cash basis. I'm sure all of you do, but just to, as we had the opportunity to point it out, we wanted to make sure we pointed it out here. Another item to think about would be that we talked about briefly is on your P&L, right? We want to make sure that we're using collections, and that's the actual cash received. That's what should be reported as your revenue. Your production, again, is when you do the procedure, you bill it out, you produce it, you're still waiting on that insurance adjustment or whatever it may be. Or maybe you've got a preliminary insurance adjustment, because you've got your insurance books properly set up in your practice management software, so on and so forth. One area to note here, that we use or we recommend our clients look at in terms of embezzlement, not to scare you guys, but embezzlement runs rampant in dentistry. One area to look at here is a consistent discrepancy between your collections from your profit and loss, meaning money that actually hit your bank, and your collections and net adjustment out of your patient management software, your practice management software. So it could be as simple as, maybe things are being miscoded in your practice management software. Maybe they don't have the adjustments set up properly between the production adjustments or the collection adjustments. Maybe there's a little bit of timing difference, but overall, again, over a trend, a long period of time, those things should be within an immaterial amount of one another. And so if not, maybe consider having somebody, dive a little bit deeper into it and see what happens, see what they can find out. Since we talked a lot about the the setup of the P&L in terms of operations and getting that operational items, inevitably there's going to be things that come up that are like extraordinary, right? So maybe they're like a one-time issue, or maybe they're an ongoing, right, investment in the practice. An example of investment in the practice that we have a ton of clients do, that we are all for and very much support our clients to invest in, is like dental consulting, right? Can be very expensive, but usually we see, our clients have a fantastic return on their investment, when they're working with a good consultant. However, again, that also skews the expense, right? The operating ratios of the dental practice when you have large, one-time expenses. things like maybe you had a, God forbid you had a employee firing who sued you, right? That you have a large legal issue going on, or maybe you move your office. You want to make sure that, we're taking that into consideration. Significant large repairs, you want to look at those in what we call an investment in practice area. And like I said, the consulting is another item that we commonly see. So those things are important, and we want to make sure we understand them and capture them, but we put them in their own little separate, area, so that way you can see exactly what you're investing into your practice, because it's not an operational issue or an operational result. That's an investment. Okay, so if you think about, creating a hygiene checklist, so to speak, for your profit and loss, a few things that you want to make sure that you're looking through your profit and loss and looking at. Okay, your revenue equals your collections, that everything's been recorded. So that means the cash that you receive, so on and so forth, because that, even though you don't want to report it, maybe you should. One-time expenses, make sure that those are cleaned out and put in an area that's dedicated to one-time expenses. Hopefully, if you're using QuickBooks, hopefully you've got a section set up in other income that's below the operating area. So that way you can capture those, or other expense below the income, operating income. Same thing with owner's compensation. You want to make sure that either you're normalizing that, paying yourself like you're paying an associate dentist, right? So many of our doctors, pay themselves whatever makes sense based on, trying to save in payroll taxes or trying to maximize retirement funding. Both of those are very valid, right? But if you're trying to make sure that you understand your operating analytics, operating information for your practice, you want to normalize that or separate it out, which is what we do. We recommend doing, so we don't have to go through the hassle. Making sure that you're using the cash basis, and then lastly, making sure that you've got your different profit centers segregated. Hygiene is as a prime example of one, simply because it's a huge expense. It's a huge revenue generator, huge expense in your practice as well. And we'll get into that. I'll show you an example of how we set ours up for our clients. Okay, so key revenue metrics that we'll want to look at. Collection. These are not directly in your profit and loss, right? So let me just preface that. But they're information that can be gleaned with your profit and loss in hand. And again, a good thing to look at over time. So if you look at it each quarter, year over year, whatever that may be, look at a trend, a long point in time. But things like, collections per provider. Collections per provider per day. If you're having a daily huddle, right? Or maybe you've got a team bonus, something like that set up, you can use a metric like that. Or if you want to know how efficient is my practice, based on the physical space that we have, maybe collections per square foot, or collections per chair. Those are both very important, and be able to compare against a peer group and say, yes, we're underproducing, or man, we're really overproducing. Maybe we are ready for a little bigger facility or something like that. Collections per hour, any kind of things that you're looking at. Maybe you're feeling like our schedule's full, but we're not doing super well. We're not collecting enough. So maybe that can be used as a diagnosis tool for, maybe we ought to look at renegotiating our PPO schedules, or maybe we ought to consider getting out of network with our lowest paying PPOs contracts, so on and so forth. Let's see here. We just talked through the PPO adjustments, refund patterns. That's something else to look at when I was thinking about areas of potential issue that you could think about. Again, an area of concern for dental practices is fraud and embezzlement. Refunds is an easy place. A lot of doctors and dentists don't think about, the front office person, swiping a refund on their credit card, their own personal credit card through your credit card machine. So pay particular attention to look at refunds. Okay, so your revenue mix, something to think about. That what's going to be key here. A couple of key indicators is going to be like your hygiene ratios. Like what percentage of my production is hygiene related? What's my new patient flow? Is that up or down over time? What is my, if I'm adding in ancillary procedures, especially things that are cash pay, perhaps like Invisalign or maybe implants, sleep apnea treatments. Those types of things. A lot of states allow dentists to do even like Botox. So we've got a ton of clients that do these ancillary things that are not directly related to the practice of general dentistry, right? But they're already there. Patient, that is already there in your office. So I grew up and we owned a group of Dairy Queens, and I'll never forget, one of the lessons I learned was like, okay, when they get the sundae, you always ask them if they would like the whipped cream and the cherry, because it's so much, easier to add the extra, 75 cents right on top and increase that per ticket item. So it's similar idea here. You want to really be able to look at what is my production breakdown, my procedure breakdown, what are the things that I could do and offer to my existing patient base that's going to allow for more profit effectively. Some items in a dental practice, that you might consider like cost of goods sold, so direct costs. Another thing to think about would be like variable. There's a few variable costs in a dental practice. So most of your P&L in a dental practice is going to be a fixed expense or non-variable expense. So meaning like whether you do $100,000 of production or $300,000 of production, it's you have the exact same expense. So things like facility, staff wages, by and large, your advertising, your insurance, your accounting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all fixed, right? So that's kind of creates your watermark. And then you've got your variable expenses on top of that, things like your dental supplies, your lab fees, ortho lab, implant parts. The more procedures you do, and specifically the more procedures of specific types with a few of them, the higher those expenses are going to be. Same thing if you employ associate dentists, right? That's going to be a variable expense because they're going to be paid a percentage of collections, or at least we recommend that they're paid a percentage of collections. And so when you're factoring in your budgeting and your daily goals and you're looking at and reading your profit and loss, you look at and say, okay, I've got my fixed expenses and I've got my variable expenses. We group together our variables, so that way we know exactly what that is. And then when we're trying to set goals, the important thing to think about is like every additional dollar of revenue usually results in somewhere between, call it 90 and 80, 80 and 90 cents of profit because of the relationship of the fixed expenses versus the variable expenses. Okay, so few things here to look at real quick. Single largest controllable item in a dental practice is going to be your supplies. So, of course, we work with the great folks at Zen One with our client base and recommend our clients use their platform in order to control this expense. Because it's one of those things as a consumable, it's like once you use it or once you buy it, right, you can't get those dollars back. And so if you're using a platform like Zen One, you can really control your expense, control your supplies on hand, and really would love to see that range somewhere in the 5 to 7% of your total overall revenue, your collections. Our most profitable practices have it like the 3.5 or to 4.5%. But largely, if you say, okay, my benchmark range is 5 to 7, is going to be pretty healthy. That's going to be largely driven on a couple of different things. One is going to be your procedure mix, right? What type of procedures are you doing and what do you have on hand for those procedures? The other largest, driver there, honestly, it's like, what am I buying that's name brand versus what am I buying that maybe is off brand? And Tiger, maybe you have an idea on some kind of ideal relationship that you see in your clients or customers on that ratio of name brand to off brand. I know I have my thoughts, but your thoughts are probably prudent.
Mine are going to be slightly different. I always challenge our doctors to think about to add to that mix the insurance part, right? So, for example, some people say, "Well, my insurance only pays me this much." Okay, so then for that insurance, maybe you have a cheaper composite, right? So maybe we use Venus Calzer composite that's $20 versus something that's $100. So being flexible on that. So what product is being used for, I hate to say it, for which insurance, because that's what you're getting paid for, is something that people rarely talk about. And it's not creating any extra work to carry those products in your shelf. Like it's just the one item of this, and then that. And so we stay at that point. I think the second part to try to help answer your question is, I mean, it's always coming down to everybody agreeing on the same product, right? So hygienists, dental assistants agree on the same gloves. So I don't like to see offices using 6 different brands because this hygienist loves these specific gloves and then somebody loves these gloves. It's the same brand across the board and we all agree that we're going to use it. I know it's a sensitive subject for a lot of people, but that's their typical recommendation. And I would say the third part that people rarely think about is a lot of offices look at the P&Ls. That means you guys are growing, right? So all of the offices that are attending, if you're growing, that means you're looking for associate. Part of bringing an associate on board should be the inventory list that you use at your practice. Because a lot of times you bring an associate and a month after you realize that that associate has no clue how to use your burr. And they start asking for burrs that you've never heard about. And so it's really helpful to have a list, the inventory list on Zen, print it out, include it in a contract and say, these are the products that we're using. Anything extra to that, we'll have to go through the approval process. Are you okay with that or not? So I would just say these are the 3 things that I would recommend.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So limiting the number of SKUs, right, that are on hand. But I never thought about considering having like a bronze, silver, gold type of product mix for certain items. That can make a lot of sense. I could hear now some clients are like, patient's a patient, right? You want to make sure we're using the proper stuff that I have trust in. But you're right. Unfortunately, insurance dictates so many different things, if you will. So trying to take a little bit more control of that narrative, that does make a ton of sense. And then of course having a formulary, right, that everybody agrees to would be super important. That way you're not stocking all kinds of different things. The other thing I would just say, just to think about too, would be to have central supply storage. So many offices that we go into have supplies, just flowing out of every operatory. If you have a central supply storage, then it helps you maintain those SKUs and helps you maintain your inventory levels. To help from things like going bad, spoiling, expiring, things never being used, collecting dust, those types of things as well. So anyway, but benchmark there, 5 to 7%. Largely going to be driven by your mix of the formulary, of all the different SKUs that you're ordering, the different types of procedures you're doing, and the number of vendors that you're ordering from. And what you're going to want to look for over time there is just that ultimately that percentage continually creeping up as a percentage of your revenue. Theoretically speaking, it should stay pretty consistent over time. If you're doing the things you need to do, raising fees on an ongoing basis, renegotiating your PPO contracts on an ongoing basis, making sure that you're using a platform like Zen One as an example in order to minimize your overall spend, get the best value for your dollar that you're spending there. A few things to think about, that we see, just that you can just literally throw money away. If you're ordering a whole ton of supplies, if you got things that go to waste through expiration, if you're ordering from too many vendors, and then largely what comes down to having that centralized supply is, I think back to the restaurant business, right? Every restaurant business has a par level ordering or par ordering. So they go in, they take inventory, and then they order to par, right? For their, to make sure they have enough steaks on hand or enough milk or enough whatever product on hand. I think the key there is to make sure that there's clear ownership of who does the inventory and who does the ordering and who's responsible for it. And perhaps even bonusing that person on maintaining those key metrics in order to make sure that you're hitting your profitability metrics. Things that you can control, you absolutely should try and control them. So, do we have a poll here? I don't know that we have a poll here. Okay, so but moral of the story, if supplies, just as a comparison, or just so you guys know, like if supplies are 2% over that benchmark on a high performing single doctor or a reasonable performing 2-doctor practice, 1.6 million of collections, right? The financial impact is huge, right? It's a lot. 2%, right, is going to result in like $32,000, $16,000 for every 1%. And so if you factor in, you say, okay, we're an $800,000 collecting practice or a $1.2 million collecting practice. You can take that 1 or 2% and do that math real quick and know, like, man, what's at risk here for me? Like, what do I have to gain from it? That would go a lot toward your, toward your student loans. It would go a lot toward your retirement funding. It would go a lot towards that, new vehicle that you want to, buy, or, new technology, getting into, CE or whatever it may be in your practice to be able to increase the procedure mix that you have in your practice. So that's why it's super important to track and set your P&L up in such a way and really be, an active participant in management of the process around supply ordering.
Can we just, Drew, I want to take it just for 1 second. Even though I know the time is tight, we have like maybe 24 minutes left. The one thing, if you go back to that one slide, people also don't think about that. That number, the savings, also translates into EBITDA. So when we look at not just how much we saved you that money per month, that number you can easily multiply by 3x or 5x, because that's the typical range that we see people would sell their practices in the future. So if we're talking about, it's only $10,000 savings, well, multiply that by 5x. That's literally, that money is going into the EBITDA equation when people are selling the practice or evaluating their practices, because everybody's paid. Like, that money straight up is there. Multiply that by 5 or 6 or 7, depending on how you want to value your practice. And that's the number that you're actually looking at. So Drew, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong there, but I just wanted to bring it up. It's not just we're looking at a % or 2 off of the collections. We're not just looking at a 10,000, but multiplied by EBITDA equation. And I think that number becomes even bigger.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And so actually the presentation I give at a lot of dental study clubs or dental study groups has a section in there about like why it matters, right? And so not only in this instance or this example, would you put $32,000 a year back into your pocket, right? But say that your ultimate goal is to sell to a DSO, right, or another single buyer, right? Then ultimately, your value, right, is going to be somewhere in that 100 to 270, 180,000 more than what it would be otherwise. And so it's big. Not that you're going to sell every year, right? You're going to do that once in the future, but that's super important to have a trend, a 3-year trend when you do go to sell to, to whoever is going to buy your practice eventually, of your overhead being managed in such a way where it's going to be repeatable, because that's what they're going to look at. So you're absolutely right, Tiger. That does have it has an ongoing year over year basis, money that in my pocket today, but it also has the impact of more money in my pocket eventually when I do sell my practice, because I'm going to sell it eventually. It's just a matter of when, right?
Yeah. And Drew, very quick, the polls came back. So the question was, what's your biggest challenge with finances right now? Well, revenue is good, but cash feels tight is 67%. And then cost feels out of control. It's only 2 answers, 33%. So just to give you a reference there for the remaining 20 minutes of the webinar.
Cool. Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to look at some expense groupings real quick as it relates to the profit and loss structure. And so ultimately we kind of nicknamed them buckets, if you will. So you think of buckets of expenses, but essentially, each individual bucket is going to, need a clearly defined, like what expenses go within that bucket, what benchmark ranges apply to that bucket, any types of red flags or issues that come up, that you ought to be looking for. And then last but not least, and probably most importantly, like, what can I do about it to improve it? So number one, single largest expense in any dental practice is going to be your team expenses, your payroll, your personnel, right? Salary, taxes, employee benefits, retirement, the whole 9. And that's going to include things like your hygiene, your clinical, your front office, your temporary coverage, right? Your payroll taxes, so on and so forth. in a general dentistry, general dentistry practice, generally speaking, we're going to see that fall, somewhere between 25 to 32%. And I know that's a pretty big range, but we also have doctors on here, or offices on here from all over the country. So for instance, like San Francisco is going to be different than middle of Nebraska. And so you have to know what it is for your particular region as well. But generally speaking, somewhere in that 25 to 32, used to be anywhere from 20 to 24, back in the heyday for private practices that were fee for service. And so those types of metrics can be very different depending on your practice makeup. And that again comes down to like, where are these numbers telling me over time? Where is it saying that our practice is going? If we see big spikes or drops one way or another, the question should be like, what's causing that? So some big items or red flags would be if you've got a ton of overtime, right? Ton of overtime, of course, is very expensive to your dental practice. Time and a half is very expensive. Temps filling in, also very expensive. Or if you've got payroll, cost that's rising faster than your revenue. So those types of things go back to like challenging, like, am I doing enough dentistry? Or is my practice largely hygiene revenue based at this point in time? You want to make sure that your 70% of revenue or more is made up of dental production, dentist production. 30% or so is made up of hygienist production. Some levers to impact this. It's going to be scheduling better, going to be cross training, right? So using your employees better. If we've got somebody that's out sick, which of course is always going to happen, can I pull from somebody internally to help cover some rather than having to look for an outside resource? Making sure that you've got your hygiene productivity targets in order. So that means their production, that means their perio production, the relationships there and ratios there. That you're making the best choices there for your patients, of course, and meeting standard of care. But and lastly, making sure that you can put some kind of bonus, in order to drive productivity, get everybody on the same page, working harder, rowing the boat in the same direction. Another large expense in breakout on our profit and loss is going to be facility costs. So it's going to be your rent. A lot of our doctors own their facility. You want to make sure you're paying market rate rent. Is that way you're not paying more, paying less, to yourself and your business, your rental entity, rental business. It is a separate business, treated as such. Your utilities, your repairs and maintenance. Often we're going to see that, somewhere in that 5 to 8, 6 to 9, somewhere in that neck of the woods. If you've not renegotiating your lease, do that on an ongoing basis. A couple of things that you could look at that we talked a little bit about earlier, looking at your revenue per square foot, looking at your revenue per operatory, understanding those benchmarks, and then being able to compare those to the market as a whole. Your lab and clinical outsourcing. So those are going to be things like your cosmetic lab, your ortho lab, implant parts, so on and so forth. Those need to be in production expenses. You'll see that is grouped in another separate grouping in our P&L. One of the things that maybe look at is, are we having a high remake? Do we need to get technology in our practice in order to take better imaging, in order to get better scans? Do we need to switch labs to a higher quality lab or a more consistent lab? Of course, that has scheduling implications as well. Maybe in-house milling versus outsourced milling, those types of things all come into play. Let's see, we talked about that. Marketing and new patients, right? So another item in a dental practice is how much marketing dollars are you spending? And when you look at marketing, you're going to want to know things like, what is my cost per new patient? What is my conversion rates? Your marketing agency that you're working with, assuming that you are, hopefully is helping you understand those things. But just so you guys know, in a general dentistry practice, usually we're going to see somewhere between 2 and 4% of collections spent on marketing. And that's going to be kind of like steady state, right? Like, I'm not really looking to grow. Maybe I'm not involved with, maybe I am involved with a lot of PPOs and I'm wanting to just kind of let it do its own thing. A lot of our fee for service dentists that are really trying to grow are spending upwards of 6 to 10% of revenue on marketing, doing things outside the box like TV ads around things that are there's specific types of call to actions, Invisalign cases, implants, all-on-4 implant arches, those types of things. Okay. Of course, you've got your general and administrative expenses. These are things that are going to have like your office supplies, your subscriptions, your insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It's like everything else that goes into your practice in order to run it on an ongoing basis. And so, we kind of think of like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Is how I kind of joke about it. But, death by 1,000 tools is also another way to look at it. So make sure that especially those subscriptions, make sure that you're reviewing those on an ongoing basis. Perhaps consider renegotiating your credit card fees or changing providers if you've got one that's integrated with your dental supply. With your patient management system. Maybe look at alternatives to see if the cost savings make sense to not have it integrated, or if there's another provider that integrates as well. So canceling unused tools, consolidating platforms. If you're using two tools, that kind of have some overlapping there in the world of dentistry that is rampant these day and age, make sure you're using at least everything that is available to you. And if there's maybe something can be done some other way or whatever it may be in order to minimize your overall costs. So think through things like that. Insurance and professional fees, that's a big one, because obviously you want to make sure that you have the right players, the right advisors, people in your corner, but make sure that you're getting a good value out of what you're paying for. So make sure that your accounting, for instance, right, is clean, it's timely, it's set up in a way that you can make decisions. Hopefully legal services, you're not using people or having to use an attorney on an ongoing basis. Hopefully that's something that's one and done, or every once in a blue moon. But consider your consulting as well, making sure that if you're using a consultant on an ongoing basis, that you're getting that value from them. Okay, so, and again, we talked through a little bit about what a profit and loss is and what it's not. And so a profit and loss does not tell you like what cash that you use in total. It's not the whole picture, if you will, right? So again, it doesn't tell you your debt service, your financing, doesn't talk through your owner distributions, doesn't talk about the timing differences between accrual and cash accounting. I know one thing that was in the last poll, 75% of respondents said that revenue is good, but cash feels tight. And so a couple of different things that I would look into your debt service, make sure that, maybe it makes sense to refinance, term it out over a little bit longer period of time in order to get your monthly cash flow, down, your cash outflow down for your debt service. I would also challenge you to take an honest look in the mirror at your owner distributions and say like, man, am I being a good steward of my dollars individually, personally, with my own personal spending and my own personal budget? That's another item that a lot of times we see some leakage there. And two, we're not all going to be able to produce dentistry at the same level forever, right? That's just inevitable fact. And so making sure that you're prioritizing those retirement contributions is a crazy important item. I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, so real quick, and since I'm running a little slower than I thought I was going to be, so we're going to look through a profit and loss real quick, just so that way I can show you how we set ours up. So hopefully you can glean something from it. So like our clients, most 95% of our clients or so right now get financial statements every single month. And we've got a recurring process to get through them, leveraging a lot of technology in order to get there. But essentially, each one of them are going to start with the balance sheet, because that's important to know things like your cash, right? What is my cash balance? How has it changed from the prior year? Another specific item that we want to know that's important is like, what's our credit card balance or our other, current liabilities? Like, how much are we expecting that we're going to have to pay out in a very short term? And then, of course, knowing, is that increasing or decreasing? Our long-term loans, are those increasing or decreasing? Is all this, there's some accounting specific ratios that you can look at that aren't honestly super important to the operation of a dental practice. Most of the stuff that we look at when we're talking with our clients on a quarterly basis is going to relate to the profit and loss and relate to the operating metrics out of your patient management software. But I told you earlier that, a period of time is better than a single moment in time. We still report on a single moment in time, right? For instance, a single month, and we still have things set up a certain way, but this, in my opinion, isn't the most important item. I usually skip right down to the current month compared, for the entire year compared to the prior year, because that's going to give us a much better understanding of what's going on, right? So if we look at it in this case, 9 months, we want to know what is our total revenue, right? So in this case, 1.9 million, it is up 90,000 or almost 5% over the prior year. Fantastic. We talked about those expense buckets as well as benchmarks. So personnel expenses, right? We put our benchmarks directly in our profit and loss. That way we know, our clients know very quickly and easily what they're looking at and what is going well and what's not going well. So personnel expenses target for this particular client in this particular region is 24 to 28. So you can see right here, their total expenses, 26.5% of their collections, which is up for the year. So they had a new hire, up 13.89%. They had a new hire in their hygiene department. So again, we look at the big key areas: hygiene, clinical assistant, front office. And I can look and I can say, okay, at 14%, that's kind of high. We have some room for growth there for some additional patient flows. We've got capacity in their hygiene department. We know, okay, we've got 8.77% in our clinical assistants. 6 to 8% is generally speaking, or 7 to 9% is generally speaking what we like to see in clinical assistants. So we know, okay, we've got the right number of clinical assistants. This one is a little low in the front office, but they use technology in order to offset some of those front office expenses, which is certainly helpful. Another grouping, like I had said before, is going to be your production expenses. These are going to be your variable. So your dental supplies, right? So what are you buying for dental supplies? Your lab fees, ortho supplies, ortho labs, implant parts, so on and so forth. And then of course the overall expense. This doctor has a target of 6 to 10% because they mill in-house, they keep control over their expenses, so on and so forth. And so we can see right here, 8.58% of their overall collections, which is actually down by almost 36% compared to the prior year, which is wild. They made a very conscious effort in order to make some improvements there. More groupings: facility expenses. You've got your general and administrative expenses here. And I just want to jump down and walk through. This doctor does have an associate, so we include the associate expenses in operating income. And then you can see right here, one of the most important things to look at is like, what are our total operating expenses? A lot of doctors say, I don't know what my overhead is, what percentage it is. Well, this doctor right now can say, I operated a 60% overhead, right? So I've got a 40% profit margin essentially. So my net operating income, and you can see here, 39.85%, up 26% over the prior year. And you've got all those other things that we talked about, your investments in the practice, your depreciation, your interest, your consulting would be in here. The doctor, the doctor's employee benefit or compensation package, how much they're paying themselves in wages, so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a super fast walk through there. Let me get back to the other screen here. Okay.
And just a quick answer to Lindsay. Yes, Lindsay, those of you that asked if the recording will be available, yep, we'll send it. So we will send an email after this presentation is done to rate everything, and then we'll include the PowerPoint, we'll include the recording. So that will be included. Sergio.
Perfect. Okay, so 3 actions in 30 days. So walk away from here, and what can you do for 3 actions to improve your profit and loss in 30 days? One thing is put some controls around your supply ordering, making sure that you've got those locked in. Somebody is accountable for what happens, right? And ideally bonused on the results of that, because that's the ultimate accountability, right? So if you do better, they do better. That's going to drive that, theoretically, right? Should drive that desire to do better. Resetting hygiene, productivity expectations. A lot of we see in general dentistry offices, hygienists, are maybe don't have prior expectations or don't understand what their numbers are, or maybe don't, they're not in line with what happens in the industry as a whole. So, if you need to hire a hygiene coach, to help you through that, that's a very, big, huge investment that is well well suited to set you up for success in the long term. And then a lot of doctors, spend marketing dollars, but maybe they don't know what they're spending them on, or they don't know if there's any result from them. And so, as a revenue driver specifically, so we've got one overhead driver and we've got two revenue drivers here that you can, make some changes to in order to help improve your P&L as a whole. And so make sure that your marketing dollars that are spent are actually doing some kind of conversion, right? So, there's a certain amount of money that you'll spend on marketing that's like shotgun approach, if you will, but you want to make sure that, your biggest dollars where you're pouring the gasoline on are targeted at converting specific types of campaigns. So things like Invisalign, implants, all-on-4, sleep apnea, those types of things. Have a monthly financial check-in, with your P&L. I think it was like a ridiculous amount of people did. I don't remember what the 71% of people already said that they're doing it monthly. Great, but set your profit and loss up in such a way that's going to give you the power to make decisions. So making sure that you're looking at your payroll as a whole, making sure that you're looking at your production expenses as a whole. Look at that net operating income. If you're using QuickBooks, it's the easiest thing to be able to set up and look at that net operating income as kind of effectively like an EBITDA trend, right? Which is a crazy important number in your financial statements for both your day-to-day profitability, month-to-month profitability, but Tiger pointed out, lovingly, that also your future exit, your exit potential as well. So, and also remember, like every dollar, like you can cut overhead, to a certain point, you can raise revenue to a certain point, but ultimately, like every dollar saved is money, is profit, right? Every additional dollar generated in revenue is additional profit. And so ultimately, great systems, great vendors, working with people that understand what you're doing and how a dental practice operates is very, very, very important for the success of your dental practice. So it's super important to be active participant in your success, I think is the moral of the story there. And it pays dividends, right? And, pays dividends in spades. So, and then last but not least, of course, if you would love a free trial of Zen 1, there's a bottom left is a QR code to be able to get 30 days for attending this webinar if you use the promo code ZenFan. And then there's some downloadables on the bottom right-hand side. Tiger, I don't know if you want to speak to those real quick.
Yeah, those are checklists, and pretty much if you guys attended the previous webinar, we went way deep into the supply and organization and things like that. And so if you're interested in any of the downloadable materials, including our guide, you can go and download it. So just click on that QR code and it will take you there. But also, I'll take it on me. We didn't have the right QR code for Drew to schedule a free consultation.
That was my fault.
Mine too. I should have checked that. But we will include that in the proper so when we send you the handout materials, the presentation in the email after this thing, after you guys fill out the survey, we will make sure to include the right QR code and the link so that you can schedule a complimentary call with Drew and his team as well. So. But that pretty much wraps it up.
You can do that online. You can do that online too. You can visit us at engageadvisors.com and you can schedule right on our website. So,
all right, I think we have a time for one question. So Danielle says, we're at 3 practices. We're profitable across all of them, 20% or so, and are hungry to scale and expand. What are your thoughts on the milestone that we should be targeting before we make the leap into the next venture?
So that's a fantastic question. So we've got several clients that are multi-location like that. And I always encourage, our clients, when you start adding additional locations, you add additional fixed expenses. And so making sure that every single one of your locations, it's great that it's profitable, but also make sure that it's maximized. And when I say that, make sure that you've got the maximum amount of revenue that you can get out of that single location, because it's easier to grow where you already know than it is to add a 4th location, a 5th location, a 6th location. It's also more manageable from a people and a process perspective. Really make sure that you've got your processes dialed in. Make sure that you got your marketing on point to be able to systematically improve and systematically grow with your new patient numbers. So that way you can take and add them and blueprint them right to the next location. When you start adding more locations, you have to put additional like administrative burden on the like organizational structure of those practices. So anything that you can do to minimize your management levels and maximize your revenue per location is going to be super important. You look at Chick-fil-A versus McDonald's, right? Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays, but they do like 3 times the average same store volume that McDonald's does. So, think of it that way. Try and maximize that as much as you can.
Awesome. So we're up in the clock. It's 1 o'clock Central Time. So thanks to everybody who attended the webinar. Thank you to everybody who's going to be watching it after. We'll send the survey. Please rate us. It's only 3 questions. The topic, the speaker, the presentation itself. Let us know, and then we'll send the handouts, all the materials, the webinar, and everything else. So Drew, thank you so much. I think that was pretty cool.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you all for your time. Hopefully you have a productive day.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Drew.
Thanks.